Okay, I want to thank everybody for being here again. I put myself on spotlight. Hello, everybody, and welcome. My
It's
name.
me.
Oh, and if you're not speaking, if you can mute yourself to avoid crosstalk, um, let me do a few mutings for that. Okay. Okay. Hello and welcome. My name is Jonathan Cohn. I'm the policy director here at Progressive Massachusetts. Welcome if this is your umpteenth event or your first event with us. If you've been here many a time before, you know that we do multi-issue statewide advocacy work here in Massachusetts. As I sometimes joke, trying to make Massachusetts pass the policies that many of us think Massachusetts has already passed years ago. That earlier this year, we decided to start a series of events, kind of a Massachusetts Fights Back forums, thinking about the ways that we can respond at the state level to everything happening at the federal level. As any of you who spends any amount of time watching the news knows, that there's a never-ending like barrage of what I call chaos, cruelty, and corruption that exists at the federal level under the Trump administration. And that means that we in places like Massachusetts, at the state and local level, have our work cut out for us. We both need to be doing more than we already were doing, knowing that what we were often doing before wasn't enough to begin with, and knowing that the prospects for progress on the federal level largely will be non-existent for the next 4 years, unless by accident. With the best opportunities being slowing things down and hoping things don't happen. But on the state level, we're here in Massachusetts, where we have the third largest Democratic supermajorities in the country, a Democratic trifecta, as well as various kind of forward-thinking local governments have the ability to do more, and we can do more in that more.
What's a trifecta?
Yeah, trifecta is when you refers to having trifecta meaning three, Democratic governor, Democratic House, Democratic state senate. And feel free, if you have questions, always feel free to drop them in the chat because we will be monitoring them throughout. But for tonight's event, we wanted to focus on climate action, seeing the many different ways that the Trump administration has attacked progress on climate and environmental justice, and how we have the ability here in Massachusetts need to be doing more. So we'll have a few speakers from this evening talking from different perspectives around what we can be doing here in Massachusetts to respond to what's going on at the federal level and to continue to move forward with the work of a just transition to kind of to clean energy and to keep that perspective of a Green New Deal that kind of surged into the public attention and it needs to remain a kind of guiding vision for the work ahead. So rather than my continuing to talk forever, I'm going to bring up Jess Nahigian from the Sierra Club, who will be our first speaker for the evening. As a matter of format, we'll have people each present of our speakers. Then we'll do Q&A at the end. You're welcome, though, to put your questions in the chat, and we will be monitoring them throughout. So, Jess, I will bring you up. If you have any slides or anything, just let me know, and I'll make you a co-host.
Great, thank you. And I do have slides.
Okay, so you will become a co-host, so you can share them. Okay, you should have sharing authority now.
Okay, great. Hi, folks. It's great to see everyone here tonight. My name's Jess Nahigian. I use she and they pronouns. I'm based in Cambridge, and I'm the Sierra Club Massachusetts Deputy Director. I'm trying to figure out, here we go. Sharing my screen. Just really briefly, the Sierra Club Massachusetts is the Massachusetts chapter of the National Sierra Club. The National Sierra Club is one of the oldest grassroots environmental organizations in the country. And its mission, in a very simple terms, is to explore, enjoy, and protect the planet. So I just want to give us a little bit more framing because I feel like there are so many terrible things happening. It can be hard to remember how many terrible things are happening. So before we talk about solutions, just quickly about the problem. Um, Climate science is under attack. The Paris Agreement is under attack. Those are some of the biggest things we see in the headlines, but it is hard to understate just how much our climate and environmental regulations are under attack by this federal administration. So not only is the administration cutting billions and billions of dollars in clean energy spending approved under the Biden administration, but it is also trying to attack what's called the endangerment finding, which is the fundamental legal doctrine under which the EPA has the authority to regulate greenhouse gas emissions. This will go to the Supreme Court. We will have to see what happens, but it is hard to understate just how much climate and our efforts to mitigate mitigate climate change are under attack. I'll also say they are not just attacking climate change, they are going after some long-held sort of bedrock environmental principles that our country has had for decades, whether going after things like efficiency standards. We've had those for decades. Trying to repeal pollution standards for fossil fuel power plants, including for things like mercury. I mean, some of these things are truly trying to take us back to an era before we had any environmental protections in the United States whatsoever. And Trump 2.0 in the environment, just like Trump 2.0 in many other sectors, is so much worse than Trump 1.0. Okay, so how does that affect us here in Massachusetts? Well, all of these regulations, changes, all of this is to promote fossil fuels, to make fossil fuel billionaires as much money as they possibly can. They invested heavily in Trump, and Trump is giving them one right back. So that has looked like in Massachusetts, trying to stop our offshore wind progress. Just on September 19th, the Trump administration had a stop work order to revoke the South Coast wind permit. That's stop work, I'm sorry, just to revoke the permit. That's one of the projects that's about to be built. And it's left us in a very precarious position because we've been relying on offshore wind to give us a lot of the clean energy to meet our clean energy goals here in Massachusetts. So they've done this in a number of other states already, and we already know what the playbook is. The playbook is they go after the offshore wind and then they make a deal. This is what they've done in New York. They make a deal. Okay, we'll let your offshore wind go forward if you permit our new pipeline that we want to send into your state. And so, lo and behold, just a month earlier, Lee Zeldin, EPA administrator, appeared in the Boston Globe touting that a new pipeline that should be built into Massachusetts. These two things are not coincidental. And so the pipeline conversation has kicked off again here in Massachusetts, something that we thought was pretty much dead, which was the expansion of methane gas through pipelines. We now have op-eds talking about this, and just a couple weeks ago, we heard that Enbridge, which is a multinational gas company, was announcing that they were going to be expanding one of their pipelines through the South Shore. And 6 hours after they announced that expansion, Eversource announced that they're going to help ship that gas. And then 2 hours after that, the governor said on record that she was supportive of this effort. So it is starting to hit home here in Massachusetts. And so I want to talk about sort of what we can do, what the real problems here are, and what we can do about it. All right, I just want to talk quickly about gas in Massachusetts. We are still very heavily reliant on methane, or what's known as natural gas. The majority of our gas is used for electricity and heating, and the majority of both our electricity and our heating comes from natural gas. So we're still heavily reliant on it. And gas is a problem for a number of reasons, not least because it's expensive. There's also pollution, a lot of pollution associated with it. There's safety concerns, and most important to the climate, there are a lot of greenhouse gas emissions concerns. So let's really quickly talk about each of those. So the truth of the matter is that gas is actually an expensive fuel. The cost of gas in Massachusetts for residential homes has gone up 20% over the past 15 years when accounting for inflation. And one of the reasons for that is because the United States used to just produce and consume all of its gas in the United States. Now we are a national exporter of gas, especially with things like the war in Ukraine, other global reasons that the price of gas has gone up. We're now selling to an international market, and that international market demands higher prices. And so we in Massachusetts are paying higher prices. So no matter how much gas is down in Pennsylvania, it's still going to cost us more money because we're competing with an international market to buy that gas. Okay. So gas is not as cheap anymore as it used to be. Also, piping gas to our homes costs an enormous amount of money. In 2023, the gas utility capital spending, so basically projects like pipelines, cost ratepayers $1.5 billion, which accounted for almost half of all bill costs. And one of the reasons they're spending so much money is that they are incentivized to pursue costly pipeline spending because they benefit from one of the highest rates of return on equity, which is about 10% to 11% for every new mile of pipeline that they lay. So they make a lot of money off of putting capital spending and pipelines into the ground. But even as they're spending these billions of dollars, they're locking in these costs that are going to be passed on to ratepayers for decades to come. And we're already footing this bill, and we're at risk of being locked into footing this bill for many, many more years. I'll also say that there's a pipeline expansion that is proposed out in Springfield Longmeadow, and it just underscores how expensive these pipelines are. That pipeline, it's 5 miles worth of pipeline, is projected to cost $85 million. And all of these, of course, costs are borne in particular by people who are less able to afford pipeline spending because they thus far are more likely to be on more expensive fuels. Okay, so other really big problem with gas is that it's a climate killer. So methane is 80 times as potent as carbon dioxide in global warming. It's also, when it is combusted, it releases carbon dioxide in and of itself. And so when you put those two things together, it actually is just about as bad as coal. We used to think it was cleaner, but now a lot of science tells us otherwise. And so continuing our gas system and particularly expanding our gas system is going to lock us into even more climate emissions that we just can't afford. Gas is also heavily polluting. It emits a lot of toxic particles. It causes asthma and pulmonary disease, respiratory problems. It's a particularly big problem for indoor appliances. Think of gas appliances as like little power plants that are combusting in your home, except that they have no pollution controls. And I guess I would say like the federal government used to have instead of does have. But it's quite polluting from that perspective. So what can we do about it? So there is a bill, a piece of legislation preventing gas expansion to protect climate, community health, and safety. And this bill would prevent the approval of new gas expansion, big new pipelines, within 5 miles of environmental justice communities. We know that these communities are most likely to have these projects proposed within them, and that they need protection the most from it. And so this hits a lot of different goals. I'll say there's other legislation as well. I don't know if it'll be talked about later tonight, but there are a number of different things that we can be doing to address the build out of our gas system. I also want to just draw attention to the sort of quiet bad actors in all of this in Massachusetts, whether it's Eversource saying, hey, yeah, we're going to carry that gas for you, federal government, or National Grid putting charges, $30,000 worth of charges for promotional materials into our rates, which they did last rate case. There's a lot of sort of under the table dealing that's happening. This is from a report from 2021 about who was spending the most money in Massachusetts to stop climate legislation from moving forward. And you can see that in addition to industry associations, National Grid and Eversource were at the top of the list. They also participate. One way they lobby and prevent climate bills from moving forward is through industry associations. In March, the Globe reported that Eversource and Avangrid are now part of Consumers Energy Alliance, which is a fossil fuel industry lobbying group. And they claim that they used shareholder money and not ratepayer money for that membership, but we won't know, and we don't know until the next rate case comes up and we can try to figure that out. So I mentioned also that utilities are using money for advertising, like goodwill advertising. You've probably seen like PR inserts in your bill, or if you get emails, I don't know about you, but I get emails about like the great nonprofit work that Eversource is doing, right? This is purely promotional and it shouldn't be going into our rates. And so we have another bill that is to prohibit the use of ratepayer funds for lobbying, promotions, and perks. And this bill would prohibit charging ratepayers for anything that doesn't have to do with, through their rates for anything that doesn't have to do with delivering safe, affordable, reliable service. And it would require transparency. So annual line item disclosures of these prohibited expenses to ensure compliance. And if they were found to be non-compliant, there are actual penalties for deterrence. And I just want to shout out that there are other ways to lower our energy bills, that we don't have to look to gas to lower it. And I'll say that it's very dubious, if not completely wrong, to say that more gas would even lower our energy bills. But there's some really low-hanging fruit here. Like we could lower that 10 to 11% rate of return that the utilities get. We could stop some of that reckless spending on capital expenditures. We could build more clean energy, which can help us meet times of peak demand, the times that we build our entire energy system out so that it can handle. These are all ways that we can lower energy bills and not put ourselves deeper into the fossil fuel money pit. So a couple ways to take action. We have a petition that goes to to your representative and senator and the governor to ask them to support this legislation and to lower excessive utility profits. I'll also say that if you are somebody who lives in Liberty Gas territory, your rates are under review right now. Liberty Gas is trying to raise rates on their customers by over 50%, somewhere between 50 to 80%. It's truly a ridiculous amount of money that they're asking for. And we have another letter to the governor and to the Department of Public Utilities telling them to take action on some of these things as well to lower that rate increase.
Awesome. Is that the last slide? Awesome. For those guys that have questions in the chat, we will be sending you follow-up. You will get all of these bill numbers and follow-up. This recording will be sent to you, so don't worry. Can we get a round of Zoom applause for Jess before we go on to the next speaker? And we will be doing some Q&A at the end. Jess, when you were talking about the need to contact legislators and contact Governor Healy, reminded me of shout out Progressive Mass's new stickers of your legislators are lonely, give them a call, is I think the attitude that we should always be taking. So just thank you again. Feel free to drop things into the chat, and we will definitely be sending out comprehensive follow-up after this. I want to bring up next Jazmin Castellón, and let me know if did I pronounce that correctly? Awesome, from GreenRoots. And I was thinking when we were thinking about this event, thought about all the amazing work that GreenRoots does as kind of in environmental justice work in a frontline kind of environmental justice community, and wanted to hear from you about like what does that look like this year so far, and what are the supports needed for an organization like GreenRoots, and like what are kind of the how you adapt and what all's what all's going on going forward. So I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Jonathan, and thanks for the invite. I'm really excited to be here talking with you guys about Green Roots. Like Jonathan said, my name is Jazmin, and Green Roots is an organization that works out of Chelsea and East Boston. And for those of you that aren't familiar, we work on a lot of things, youth empowerment, food insecurity, air quality. But our climate justice work revolves mostly around um, heat and flooding mitigation due to climate change. Both of those things are really pressing in Chelsea, in part due to all of the important infrastructure that we have there for all of Massachusetts and even honestly parts all of New England. So in Chelsea and East Boston, there is so much important infrastructure crammed into, the 6 square miles, the airport, important, one of the biggest produce centers in all of New England, road salt, electric substations. And so all of that obviously takes up space and cement. And so there isn't as much space for things like trees or like flooding infrastructure. And so that is some of the stuff that we're working on, and we try to use community power to try to combat some of these things. One of the things that I do personally is I run a tree keeper program and a tree planting program. So we go out and plant a ton of trees every year and then have residents and their families come out and water them so that they survive in their first couple of years. That and also I was on a project actually that got cut because of the funding, and I can that would support flooding not happening in the New England Produce Center, which again is produce that goes out to all of Massachusetts, all of New England, and all of that stuff is like super important, and they're really real issues because there's been a ton of cuts of funding in the last year, especially. But the biggest hurdle that we have right now is the organizing itself. Yeah, I know, it is super important. And honestly, that project was completely cut. And we, and again, all this is important, but the organizing is definitely one of our biggest hurdles. So, um, basically, how are we asking people to come out and plant a tree when we can't guarantee their safety? And how can we ask folks to, like, let's say, invest and imagine a better Chelsea, a better Massachusetts if they don't know if they're going to be here tomorrow. So we've actually been diverting a lot of resources, time, and energy into like immigration work. And we've invested in organizations such as LUCE, LUCE, that mobilize to document all of the kidnappings, honestly, that are happening on a daily basis in Chelsea and East Boston. And I do mean every single day, at our courthouses, on our streets, out of people's work vans, cars, in our parks and green spaces. So, some of the biggest supports that we are again diverting time and energy to and wanting folks to support us with is to help make Massachusetts a sanctuary state and get top-down legislation that would help us to keep people safe in the streets, in the courthouse, where they're just trying to get their legal proceedings done and squared away. And they can't do that because they're being taken like right out of the courtroom. Um, so yeah, that's GreenRoots, and that's what Chelsea's facing right now.
Jazmin, I want to thank you so much for the work that GreenRoots is doing, and especially kind of highlighting the intersection between issues that so often issues get talked about in kind of in silos in a lot of spaces. And it's a recognition, kind of that recognition that like we can't achieve, like we can only achieve the better world that we want from a climate perspective if that better world has everybody with us. And that if everybody feels safe and welcome in advancing that world. And if you can make sure to drop in the chat how people can learn more about Green Roots and how they can help in that kind of that critical organizing work. And if you want to drop, I saw somebody already dropped in a link for the Luce Network, which is great as well. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll make sure to drop GreenRoots in the chat too. Thank you so much.
Awesome. And I want to invite up next. I want to invite up Nina. Let me invite up Nina Schlegel. When I was thinking of this event, before the concept of the Green New Deal came to mind, that I know Nina's done a lot of great work in that space, that in the late 2010s, that kind of framing, which had been percolating in various spaces for years before, shot up into the national attention as a way of marrying kind of the need for climate action with the need for economic justice and for kind of building out that better world. And thought, what does that look like now under where we are now? What are the efforts being done to keep that going forward on the state and local level? And I thought Nina would be a great person to talk about that. So take it away.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for including me in this great event tonight. Thanks so much, John, for inviting me and having me here. I'm Nina. I am the director of the Global Center for Climate Justice. We're a climate justice movement support organization. So by support, I mean we provide resources and we resource the movement with research, model policies. We do public education and presentations and networking great activists with each other across issue areas. A lot of our work has been focused on Green New Deal, and we're starting to move more and more into the democracy space, which I'll talk a little bit about too. Also realizing that I don't have a presentation for y'all tonight, but I'm more than happy to share a presentation that I have on a ton of really great Green New Deal model policies. That presentation is like an hour long, so you can really sink your teeth into it, but wasn't quite appropriate for tonight. So yeah, I mean, I think that the question is a real one, and I want to also ground my comments tonight in the moment that we're all faced with, that people are overwhelmed, that they're facing an onslaught of terrible news, funding cuts, threat to their communities, financial strain personally, mis and disinformation and isolation. And so the question for me has always been, even when, drafting up the Green New Deal for the city of Boston, and that was during the pandemic, like how do we keep our ambition for real justice first, structural transformation, like that embodied in a Green New Deal moving forward? And right now, the short answer is that we create momentum with outstanding programs and initiatives and wins at the local level, and then we build on that, and then we share it, and then we grow it. And in thinking about what I wanted to say tonight, I've tried to narrow it down to 4 key takeaways that kind of speak to this moment and some examples of what those takeaways can look like. And the first takeaway is that we have to talk about authoritarianism and our democratic rights. It's going to be hard to get people on board with climate initiatives right now if they are bombarded by mis and disinformation, if they are fearful of the government and afraid to use government services. However, our cities and our states have a responsibility and a duty to protect their residents and counter rising authoritarianism and the curtailment of our rights. And that is fundamentally tied to our rights, particularly our First Amendment rights, and our rights to a clean and livable climate, which are enshrined in the Massachusetts Constitution. There's a really great example of what cities are beginning to do, and that's embodied in Albuquerque, New Mexico. So on the city's website, they have created a page called Defend Albuquerque, and that website details how the federal orders and actions are directly impacting the city's work financially And they're also detailing what services are available to all types of different residents, impacted residents, undocumented residents, and they're also detailing exactly how the city is fighting back. So to make that information transparent, has been really amazing to see. There are many other ways that cities can pick up the torch. The second takeaway is that we need to work at scale and that we need to finance at scale. So for those of you who might be familiar with Project 2025, which is a right-wing vision for America that Trump has kind of adopted wholesale, that is just the opening play. ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, has now introduced Project 2025 for the states. And there's also millions that has been invested in what are called charter cities, which are basically regulation-free playgrounds for tech titans. And this is the scale of their thinking. And this is why scaling up and things that are scalable are a way that we also need to be thinking. And there's a couple of different ways to do that. One is to think about passing state enabling legislation, which is very important, whether it comes to the regulation of data centers, whether it comes to enabling legislation around green and public banks, or legally committing to clean energy goals, so that we have a legal mechanism and hook. And it is time to identify some of those dams that are holding us back, particularly at the municipal level. Are they still necessary? And if not, how do we create a supportive state level policy environment that will allow us to accelerate our progress? Because I guarantee Alec is thinking at this level. And we also need to be thinking about how we finance the transition ourselves. And what I've heard from a lot of the folks that I've been talking to is about all of the funding cuts, the federal funding cuts, and like how cities have lost millions. And that's real. You know, we have friends that run organizations that have lost millions. But what I would also say is there are so many creative opportunities for cities and states to raise that money themselves and through partnerships. And I'm happy to share many of those examples, whether it's through new fees, whether it's through climate bonding, whether it's through green banks. There are ways to raise substantial amounts of money. I'm talking hundreds of millions of dollars to billions of dollars at the city and state level to do this work. So we can do it. So in terms of scale, a really great example is Utah Renewable Communities. It's a coalition of 19 cities and counties that have come together to launch a 100% renewable electricity opt-in program. It is a model for regional energy collaboration. They're going through the state like regulatory process right now, but we're talking, you know, at least like 1.2 million people that would be covered by this opt-in program. So thinking at scale and thinking about partners. Another example would be to think around these financing mechanisms. And this is something through our Boston Green New Deal Coalition that we have been advocating for in Boston. And I think it was through our advocacy and our hearing in the city council that we got the recent climate action plan, the draft of the climate action plan here in Boston, to also include discussion of how we're going to finance these climate actions in our next climate action plan. So that's really, really exciting. The third takeaway would be to be bold and think creatively. And I don't know how many Andor fans, the Star Wars show Andor fans are out there, but you have friends everywhere. And this is something I've learned doing Green New Deal policymaking and advocacy for the last 5 years, is that you shouldn't be intimidated just because something hasn't been done in your city or community before. I guarantee you, someone in another city or another state or another country has been thinking about it or has tried it out. This has been the case almost universally when folks come to us or we're researching like, how can we creatively look at housing issues or transportation issues or workforce development? And so we created the Green New Deal Resource Hub to be an online resource for cities and coalitions that are working to forward the ideas of a Green New Deal, because there's already so much amazing innovation that's already taking place out there. I'll share a few examples because they're so fun. Examples are like my favorite thing. From Medellin, Colombia, they have an example around health. Um, in Medellin, they were having huge health disparities because this massive increase in traffic that was happening in the city. And so in 2016, they started with planting in over a couple of years. They planted 1 million trees and 2 million shrubs. And not only did they significantly improve their health outcomes, they also reduced the city's average temperature by 2 degrees Celsius. And that was in the first 3 years of the program. Housing, when it comes to housing, like there's so many different programs that you can look into. Some of my favorites are around supporting the development of housing cooperatives. Many of those examples exist outside of the US. My family's from Switzerland. Zurich provides free technical and legal assistance to people who want to start housing cooperatives and sometimes gives them zero interest loans or even lets them lease city-owned land. That's not just a Swiss example. In New York City, there's the Urban Homesteading Assistance Board, and they have helped create numerous housing cooperatives, and I think that they've helped over 70,000 residents in New York City alone. So it exists in the US as well. The fourth and final takeaway that I'll is to think intersectionally, and to think in terms of economic justice too when we're thinking about climate. Because climate by itself can be a hard thing to champion, particularly now when people are worried about the cost of living and like a sandwich costs $15. And people are worried about the kind of country that their kids are going to inherit. And it's very fair. So a better way, observationally, and from what I've heard from activists that we work with, is to approach climate is to center justice-based programs and projects that have a clear environmental benefit as well. And I think in part that's because any issue we're talking about and the crisis that we face are not just climatic. Climate is actually not really its own issue, but more of a lens and a worldview within which to frame every issue and every action. So we're not just talking about building affordable housing. We're talking about how do we build climate resilient, net zero affordable housing. Don't just like create jobs. How are we creating 21st century clean jobs with union pathways? For examples, I would, point to Boston's recent climate action plan draft, which has been really exciting to see how they really acknowledge the intersectionality of all of their different plans and programs, which in 2025 shouldn't feel like news, but for many cities, this is a major achievement. To make sure that all of these plans and programs are very intersectional and like aligned with each other, and the developments are in pursuit of multiple long-term goals within multiple plans. And thinking intersectionally in terms of economic justice on a statewide level, Mass CEC has projected that our state needs at least 34,000 trained people in the clean energy and clean transportation economies by 2030. Climate is intersectional. 34,000 people is the entire population of Lexington, Massachusetts. And we need that in 4 years. So how are we going to get there? We're going to get there through intersectional policies that think about that front environmental and economic justice and front ways to create workforce development programs. One really amazing example is out of New York City. They're building out an clean economic innovator hub with an initial investment of 100 million from the city, and they've attracted many hundreds of millions of dollars more. They plan to support over 150 different startups and have an economic impact of $2.5 billion in the coming years. That's not the only city that is thinking about how we create the clean jobs of the future. It's actually based off of a program that is done in LA, where they have already trained thousands of residents, and there are many other cities that are on the way doing that as well. So think bold, think big, think intersectionally. And yeah, happy to talk about more examples if y'all wish. And I'll close out by saying that I'm happy to be a resource and connect one-on-one if you're working on policy, and I'll put my email in the chat.
Awesome. Thank you, Nina. Thank you so much. And I love what's this, especially when like everything that we see out of the federal level is terrible. It's exciting to be able to see the positive examples happening at the city and state level in so many places. And I really liked the although I've not in fact actually watched Andor, I loved the You Have Friends Everywhere connection as a way of thinking about policy innovation. But I see that happening already. Round of Zoom applause for Nina. And I realized before, get that, I never formally asked for the round of Zoom applause for Jazmin, so do a round of Zoom applause for Jazmin as well. And if Nina, if you can drop in the chat, as you already said you would, uh, any kind of follow-up links or how people can reach out to you to help with all of the great work that you're doing. I'm gonna bring up like the talk about financing really is a great segue to kind of an upcoming presentation. To introduce our next speakers, I was gonna bring up John Kyriakis from our Neponset Valley chapter to introduce them. So it's not just me talking all evening. So let me bring up John. Wait, where? Oh, hold on one sec. Okay, John, you're on.
Hi all. I'm John Kyriakis from the Ponce Valley Progressives and also from Indivisible and 350 Mass. Our next speaker is Dan Zackin from 350 Mass, and he's a leader in that organization here in Massachusetts. And what he's going to talk about is the Make Polluters Pay bill, which is a major priority for 350 and also for Progressive Mass. And this is a very creative way to provide funding to deal with paying for various climate actions and goals, especially in light of the paucity of funds from the federal government. So I'll let Dan take over now and give his talk.
Thank you so much, John, and thank you to both you and Jonathan for organizing and to Progressive Mass for your support throughout this campaign. I have some slides for y'all tonight, but the core message that I want to leave you with is that one of the main ways that we can take the fight to the federal administration and the fossil fuel billionaires that are backing it up is by making the biggest oil and gas companies pay for the climate damages that we're currently paying 100% of the cost for. So we have a bill, the Climate Super Fund, and we have a campaign to make it happen, Make Polluters Pay. I'm going to talk a bit tonight about the campaign, about the bill, what we're trying to do. And I know that we have a lot of 350 Mass members, we have a lot of Progressive Mass members who have heard this spiel quite regularly. So I'm going to go pretty quick and make sure that we have plenty of time for questions after the next presentation at the end, which is the other 350 Mass priority campaign, Save Money with Clean Heat, presented by Mike DeCita. So we have a bill, H1014 S588, which is looking to make the biggest oil and gas companies pay billions of dollars for climate damages that their products have caused. Again, I'm Dan, I'm the legislative manager with 350 Mass, and right now we're in the pretty bad timeline. Things are not looking good, and we are facing, on top of the many, many awful things that have already been described tonight, relentless climate disasters. It seems like every summer we have another huge cloud of smoke drifting over from the now annual Canadian wildfires. We have floods, we have extreme heat, we have all these awful things hitting us. And if we're going to fight against it, and if we're going to build a mass movement to mitigate and thrive in the face of these disasters, we need to have a positive vision of the future. And that would include renewable energy. For me, that would include a lot of greenery and local agriculture and access to nourishing food. And so the way that we make these big oil and gas companies pay is by applying this old precedent, the Superfund. And I apologize to anyone who doesn't feel like 1980 was that long ago on the call. But in 1980, Congress passed one of the most powerful environmental programs, the CERCLA, which I'm failing to remember exactly what it stands for right now, but Mike up next is a lawyer and can fill that in. It created the Superfund program that made polluters pay for damages that they caused to communities. So if your factory spilled sludge into a river, you have to pay for the cost of cleaning that up. And what we're trying to do is apply that to the climate, to make the fossil fuel companies that have been using our atmosphere like an open sewer for decades pay into a fund that will then give out money and help us build resilience across the state. And we're looking to make the biggest companies only pay. And I'll explain why that's important a little bit later on. But ones that emitted over 1 billion tons of carbon dioxide or carbon dioxide equivalent gases during our covered period. And there's a growing push to do it. There's states and municipalities that are suing big oil directly, like the suit that Governor Healy started back when she seemed to care more about climate. Then there are, oh, that's the wrong slide. And there are several states that are passing bills like this. New York and Vermont have already passed theirs, and there are, I believe, 8 other states in addition to Massachusetts, Vermont, and New York, with more joining all the time. And so what we're looking to fund are exactly the things that you've been hearing about tonight, things that mitigate flooding, extreme heat, poor air quality in our communities. And while New York set a cap of we're going to get $75 billion and we can figure out what's proportional to each company's emissions, Vermont decided they're going to leave it up to the state treasurer to calculate damages. So we're not setting a hard number, we're following Vermont's lead, and we're saying the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs can look into how much these companies owe. And I believe Secretary Tepper and Climate Chief Hoffer are looking into that right now, even in advance of actually passing this bill. And so, as I mentioned, we're part of 11 other states, and it is hugely excited to both have New York and Vermont starting their process and defending the bill against fossil fuel industry attacks in the courts, and a federal bill, which right now is just a messaging bill, but we'll see under future administrations if that goes anywhere, that Senators Markey and Warren are fully on board with and in support of. And so honing in a little bit in our Massachusetts bill, we have 3 fantastic sponsors. I'm sure anyone on a Progressive Mass call is very familiar with Senator Eldridge. We also have Representative Owens from Watertown and Representative Lewis from Framingham. And we're following an inside-outside track. So we're doing the lobbying, the behind-the-scenes meetings, all the pressure within Beacon Hill that we need to familiarize legislators with this bill. But the way that we actually win is with the pressure in the streets. Mass protests, civil disobedience, direct action, and all of the fun activist tools that we have in our toolkit. And the need here is very, very clear. So just 2 years ago, we had that massive flood in Vermont and the Connecticut River Valley, and farms all across Western Mass were completely inundated. Some lost almost their entire season's crops. And at the same time, in the recommendations of the climate chief, the funding line says the Commonwealth currently lacks a comprehensive plan. They've tried to fill that with the recent environmental bond bill, which authorizes a decent bit of funding, but a bond is just future debt. Our goal is to take taxpayers off the hook for paying 100% of this cost. And we need to do it quickly. The Blue Hills caught fire last fall during a historic drought, as did the Lynn Woods and forests out in the Berkshires. And Massachusetts towns have just $5,000 on hand for disaster response. So our cities and towns are not able to handle this alone. The federal government is not helping us and actually is moving in the opposite direction. This past April, they released an executive order specifically directing the Attorney General to crack down on state Superfund bills. And while they aren't doing great in the courts, they're definitely trying. And so the state needs to come up with new funding sources that don't rely on taxpayer dollars exclusively. And that element is really important. We talk about this a lot in progressive spaces, but I was just presenting to the Coastal Caucus yesterday, which includes some Republican members, some conservative Democrats. And while Climate Superfund is really important for our base, we can also just as fairly call this a taxpayer relief superfund, because right now taxpayers are paying 100% of the cost. And if you notice that I'm saying that a lot, it's because it is absolutely crucial to this campaign. And so our bill will establish the Superfund. It'll require top polluters to contribute billions. It'll fund projects statewide, with 40% of that funding earmarked towards projects that directly benefit environmental justice communities like Chelsea. It'll require projects to prioritize workers by paying them a prevailing wage, treating them according to fair labor standards, using apprenticeship programs and American-made steel. And we had a job study done recently that shows that if this brings in $25 billion, which is on the low end of what we expect, but of course depends on the calculations done by the administration, as I mentioned earlier, it will bring in over 7,600 jobs a year, which would be huge for our state. I'm sorry, Nina, I don't know what proportion of Lexington that is, but I think it's a decent bit. I'm not good at the quick math. And also provide funding towards preventative healthcare programs and medical care. We know in a lot of our environmental justice neighborhoods around Boston and across the state, asthma is one of the biggest killers, and that is directly impacted by extreme heat and poor air quality. And having this funding help support asthma mitigation and care for people dealing with asthma is a major way that this can benefit environmental justice communities directly. And we're building a big coalition to pass this. So Progressive Mass is on here. I know a bunch of our other organizations that are represented tonight, including 350, SIU 509, and several others, are already in this coalition. But if you're part of a local group and you don't see your logo on this, we would absolutely love to have you join the campaign. It is definitely not too late. We're bringing together climate groups, vegans, labor unions, progressives, faith-based groups, and a whole lot more to make this happen. And I'm really excited to shout out three organizations that actually endorsed in the past week: AFT Massachusetts, the American Federation of Teachers; NOFA, which is the Northeast Organic Farmers Association, a business group; and the Union of Concerned Scientists, who actually just endorsed today. So y'all are really getting this hot off the press. And it's an incredibly popular issue. There are very few conversations we've had where people are like, no, I don't want all this money coming in. And in Massachusetts, it is bipartisan supported and across all likely voters has a 76% support. That's a net of 59%. I believe that's as popular as Fair Share or the Audit the Legislature amendment on the ballot last year. And again, we're building that inside-outside strategy. You'll see pictures here from many of our recent actions over the past couple of years, including our campaign launch, a dramatic street theater, a lamentation for the earth, the Massachusetts Youth Climate Coalition Lobby Day, which had over 400 youth come to the State House to push for this bill, a municipal resolution. The bottom left is actually the first one we passed in Cambridge. And then in the top left, I think a lot of people on this call probably were involved. I unfortunately wasn't there, so I can't call people out specifically. But we actually got a resolution passed through the Democratic Convention to have this officially become part of the platform. And so if you want to take this back to your local Democratic committees and pass resolutions in support and mention this to your legislators, that's a great talking point to use. And so what we need from you is to sign our petition in the next week. We have an event coming up on the 21st, and we want to put together a great booklet so we can deliver those petition signatures to key legislators. We're very close to our 5,000 signature goal, so your signatures tonight could be some of the last few that we need. If your legislator is not co-sponsoring already, ask them to. We have a link that I'll put in the chat and send out after this meeting to help you do that. And I'm also happy to show people how to check whether their legislator is co-sponsoring, although I assume on a progressive mass call, you've all been trained on that extensively by Jonathan. And then join us both on the 21st and then a week later on the 28th. The 21st will be our big petition drop and a dramatic action to share how many people support this bill. And on the 28th, the Mass Power Forward Coalition, which I facilitate with Jess and Claire Carl from UU Mass Action, the Universalist Unitarians. We're having an action at the State House to highlight the vampire greedy utilities and the fossil fuel billionaires, and trick or treat, have little trick-or-treating visits around the State House. So I hope you consider joining us for one of those two upcoming actions. I know there's also the No Kings rally on the 18th, so it's going to be a very packed end of October. And I'm very excited to hear your questions. Thank you so much to Progressive Mass for having me, and I think I'll pass it off to Jonathan or John. One of
John,
the two.
before Dan goes, we get a round of Zoom applause for Dan.
Thank you.
And
All right, thank you. That's really important. Our next speaker is Mike DeCidi. He's going to talk about a package of legislation. There's actually 5 bills in it, and I'll put the numbers up in the chat. And these bills are a comprehensive array of legislation that will enable individual homeowners, renters, as well as communities to transition to clean heating systems. In other words, solar panels, heat pumps, and other renewables in their construction, and to do it in a way that allows them then to save substantial amounts of money, even in the face of Trump's cuts. So I'll let Mike talk about this now.
Thanks, John. Oops, can you give me authority to, or let me
Yes,
share
I'll
my
make you a
screen?
co-host and you can screen share.
Okay. I'm not sure I need to do my presentation because I think John said everything that we need to, that gave us a good overview of what we're doing here. So, hi everyone. Thanks to John, Jonathan, and everyone here. Appreciate the opportunity to present today. My name is Mike DeCida, and I'm a volunteer with 350 Mass. I joined 350 Mass earlier this year because I retired from the State Public Defender Agency last year, and I wanted to have an impact on fighting climate change and fighting the Trump administration and everyone else who's deniers. So I was happy to be part of this Save Money with Clean Heat leadership team. As Dan mentioned, this is the second of our 2 primary campaigns for 350 Mass. And as John noted, it's essentially, I mean, the title speaks for itself. We're essentially aiming to help people save money on their utility bills with clean energy. So the campaign was developed in late last year, and it was aimed at tackling 3 big problems. First, carbon emissions from houses and apartments and residences account for about 40% of all carbon emissions in Massachusetts. Heating people's homes just costs too much money. This says house. It's obviously applicable to apartments as well. But getting rid of gas or oil heat is very complicated to do by yourself. And if you're a renter, it can be just about impossible. So as we all know, bills skyrocketed last winter's. Part of that stemmed from the fact that the winter was colder, but it was also a product of energy rates just going way up as well. And so our campaign couldn't have been timed better. Mark Dian, who's on the call today, he and other people at 350 Mass must have been prescient. They must have known this was coming and saw we needed to figure out a way to help people lower their bills while still addressing the needs for climate change. So how do we do this? We've put together a list of a number of bills, or a list of bills that will provide a way for Massachusetts residents to get to net zero and save money on their utility bills. There's 5 bills, and I think if John or Dan don't do it while I'm talking, we'll get these in the chat and to you either by email or otherwise. But there's 5 bills. One relates to the Mass Save program. There's a bill that would allow local communities to transition to affordable solar and geothermal energy. Another set of bills that relates to giving municipalities more say about utilities digging up their streets, putting in infrastructure for methane that will soon be outdated. Some bills relating to making our schools green, and then an act creating a climate bank in Massachusetts. And we've also been happy to see the DPU approving some new rates for heat pump users, which are part of this package as well. So the first of these bills relates to Mass Save, and this was a subject of a hearing before the Joint Committee on Telecommunications, Utilities, and Energy, or TUE, last week. Most of these bills are before TUE. This Mass Save reform bill builds on the work that Mass Save has done up until now, focusing primarily on energy efficiency, and requires Mass Save when consumers call them up to help them develop a customized money-saving decarbonization program. The customized plan is aimed at getting people heat pumps, insulation, solar panels, electric storage to cut their bills and cut their emissions. We're working on written testimony on this bill as well, and we're hoping to even improve further on these bills. The second set of bills is from Senator Cream, who's sponsor of several of these, and Rep. Owens and Armini, providing for a tactical transition to affordable, clean thermal energy. These bills would permit both gas and electric utilities to supply a networked geothermal and solar heat pump systems. Right now, the utilities have limited capacity and ability to do this. This is in some ways a way to facilitate the larger scale geothermal that we haven't seen in Massachusetts yet. There's a project in Framingham that's a pilot, but otherwise we haven't seen any of this. And we're also hoping that there can be broader solar projects at the municipal level, and we'll get to that in a little bit later. This would allow gas companies to get a return on their investments, and allows cities and towns to develop their individual clean energy utilities. Now, some of you may live in towns that already have your own municipal light plant or your own utility. This is something different from that, and would help advance the ball even further in getting people clean money or clean energy and helping them save money at the same time. The third set of bills relates to those nasty methane pipelines, which are under all of our streets throughout the Commonwealth. For years, utilities have been digging up streets and spending inordinate amounts of money replacing pipeline, often without notice to municipalities, or often without meaningful notice, and doing work which costs ratepayers millions and millions of dollars, and will continue to cost ratepayers millions of dollars, even when these pipelines are going to be obsolete, which we hope they will be and are confident they will be in another couple of decades. This bill would require municipalities require utilities to give municipalities more meaningful notice and create a plan that will provide communities more systematic notice on this. One of the advantages of this is it can help local communities fight utilities when they're proposing to replace gas pipelines that might just need minor repairs, and that will save save ratepayers throughout the state millions of dollars. And I just realized that there was another bill that does something similar, which I didn't include in the presentation. I'll remedy that when we give you the list of bills. The fourth piece of legislation relates to greening up our schools. As I'm sure many of you saw at the start of the pandemic, our schools' infrastructure for heating and cooling, actually there's not much cooling infrastructure at all, but their HVAC systems are awful. They're pose risks to students' health, to staff's health. And we need to, given the age of many of those schools, put significant investments into improving the quality of HVAC at schools. Senator Feeney's bill and, missing a sponsor on this one. These two bills would help decarbonize our schools and help municipalities save money in the process. They would require comprehensive assessments of schools' HVAC systems and create fair paying union jobs in the process. The financing piece, Dan's talked about the make polluters pay and help save taxpayers money that way. In the meantime, we need to figure out some other ways to help finance some of these decarbonizing expenses. Right now, heat pumps and solar panels are typically paid for, or often paid for, by the people who are installing them for their own homes up front. But that costs money. And while Mass Save allows people to get subsidies for for the cost of financing those improvements. It's done at a pretty high interest rates. Typically, it's done at the cost of commercial banks rate, so 8, 9, 10%. That ends up limiting what Mass Save can do. So Climate Bank would help lower those costs and put the borrowing costs at a much lower rate and allow us to do a lot more low-cost loans and decarbonizing many, many, many more homes at a reduced cost for the Mass Save budget. Mentioned before, electric rate reform. This is something that DPU has recently approved, a lower rate for people who are using heat pumps. This will help people lower their cost of their electric bills once they install heat pumps for their homes. So that's something that we're really happy to have seen. The governor, meanwhile, so these are the bills that the Save Money with Clean Heat campaign put forth as a part of this package of bills to save renters and homeowners money on their utility bills. In the meantime, after this package was assembled, the governor introduced her own bill relating to energy affordability, independence, and innovation. I'm not going to go through all the details of this bill. It's an incredibly complicated bill, well over 100 pages, that does a lot of good things for Massachusetts consumers, and it helps address some of the issues involving environmental justice and equity. But one of the challenges here is that the governor's bill is much more of a long-term effort, and it's not as clearly centering the need for sustainability and for decarbonization as we'd like it to. So while we're supporting a lot of the goals of the governor's bill, we think that this bill needs to be enhanced even further, and we expect that the legislature, the Joint Committee, the TUE committee that I mentioned before, that they're going to be working on this bill, and our hope is that they're going to be incorporating in whatever the committee produces, they'll be incorporating the provisions of various bills that we've been putting together as our part of our Save Money with Clean Heat campaign. So following up on the concept of intersectionality, the campaign's been concerned about environmental justice and equity from the get-go. But we recognize that our original plan might have been seen as geared towards homeowners and not as much for renters. This is a major concern because middle income and lower income residents haven't yet benefited from the progress we've made in transitioning to a green economy. And energy bills obviously comprise a much larger percentage of the household budget for lower and middle income families. So what we've been working on lately is to increase our advocacy around community solar, where people who don't have the option of putting solar panels on their own roof can tap into larger solar installations that are developed. Ideally, these will be done either at the municipal level or hopefully with some changes in the state regulations on this through nonprofits so that people can essentially buy a share in a community solar program and have that all of the benefits of solar coming to them. We've also been pushing for window-mounted heat pumps for apartments. Mass Save has, in their efforts to decarbonize to date, has focused on larger ducted heat pump systems that are suitable for houses or even ductless systems. They can be expensive and not an option for renters. But there are these newer window-mounted heat pumps that are available and work great for renters. They cost as little as a tenth or even a 20th of what a larger heat pump system would be, as little as $700. And with a couple of them, you can essentially heat and cool a reasonable sized apartment at a cost of $1,400, $1,500. And we're looking to see if we can get Mass Save to incorporate these window-mounted heat pumps as part of their decarbonization programs. And then the other piece that we're looking to push for, it's not yet ready for prime time in Massachusetts because of some technical limitations and some need for some safety guidelines and the like. Balcony solar is a huge, huge part of Germany's efforts to decarbonize. There are about 2 million apartments in Germany where people have hung a solar panel that they buy at their equivalent of a hardware store. And I was going to say Home Depot, but don't want to be sponsoring large corporations like that. They'll go and get a solar panel, plug it in, and for the cost of a big screen TV, they can save 25 or 30% on their electric bills. So we are pushing for that as something that can help renters decarbonize in a big way. Where things stand right now with these bills, we've had committee hearings on all but 2 of the bills. So the TUE committee is now developing a package, which we assume is going to include a big part of the governor's bill, will include other priorities of the members of the committee. And our hope is that that the committee's bill, and we're going to continue to advocate for it, or bills, we don't know whether it's going to be 1 or 2 bills coming out of the committee, will include a lot of the legislation that we're pushing for as part of our Save Money with Clean Heat campaign. So that's where we are. Appreciate the opportunity to come and talk with you, and happy to answer any questions that people might have.
Awesome. Mike, thank you so much. And can I get a round of Zoom applause for Mike? In our final minutes for today, I want to give people the opportunity to ask questions. So if you had a question for any particular presenter or for everybody, drop it in the chat or raise your hand. And as I noted, you'll be getting a follow-up email that has the recording to this event and link and all of the different opportunities for you to take action afterwards. So if you have any questions, feel free to use the hand raise function or drop a question in the chat. One question, if anybody has something to speak to that I forget who it was, noted that I'm curious what anybody's take on, is how we address the fact that the large data center build out is going to put a huge energy strain on kind of energy supply and lead to basically the fossil fuel industry positioning itself as a solution to a solution and kind of harming progress that we've made past. I see Jess and Dan. I'll bring you both on to comment on that. And I see a question and Nina. I see people love this question, so I'll add you all on, and then I'll take on another question from the chat.
Yeah, so I'll say the data centers are here. Data centers are already here in Massachusetts. They are up and operating, and more of them are coming. And that is partly because our government has laid out the red carpet for them. They passed tax incentives for data centers last year, and just this summer, they were finalizing what data centers will qualify for those tax incentives. And essentially their answer was, if it's a data center, it qualifies for the tax incentives. So very few actual protections or stipulations on what those data centers need to look like. So the immediate thing that we need to do, the short-term action that's needed, is to add stipulations to what is getting a tax break here in Massachusetts. So either doing that through the regulatory process in those qualifying data center definitions, or through legislation in the energy affordability bill. And then I think a longer term solution is that we need protections for ratepayers and for the environment on these data centers. There's some innovative work coming out. Oregon just passed a bill that is helping protect ratepayers from basically having these data centers offload their costs onto ratepayers. And I think that there's a lot of work that needs to be done whether it's that, whether it's requiring, on-site 24/7 energy, clean energy procurement. There's a lot of different ways that we can make sure that our data center future, to the extent that it exists, is clean and green. And last thing I'll quickly say about data centers, it's unclear if this is a bubble or not. Everybody is saying this is going to be huge. We're going to need, 6 times, 10 times the amount of energy that we have today because we're all going to live in this super AI world. And a lot of, it's all predicated on this idea that if we expand at an exponential rate, the benefit or the intelligence of AI will expand at an exponential rate, and we haven't actually seen evidence yet that that's true. So it's possible that this entire thing is just like a race to a big bubble that is eventually going to pop. A lot of the data centers that are being built by real estate, not by the actual tech companies themselves, but by real estate investors who are speculating on the future of AI and the need for it. And so a lot still remains to be seen. Other folks can say more.
In the
Yeah,
order
I'm
that you
very
raise your
glad.
hand, Dan and then
Oh,
Nina.
I'm really grateful Jess went first with the technical expertise. I have two things to add to that fantastic presentation. One, that I hope folks saw the MIT study that came out this summer, I believe, about how the effect of using AI to substitute all of your thinking is similar to CTE, the concussive, I forget what it
Hmm.
stands for, concussive syndrome that football players get. And we should really be calling it chat CTE, not chat GPT. Um, and the other thing is that our allies at ACE, Alternatives for Community and Environment, the main environmental justice organization in Roxbury, have been leading a lot of national advocacy around tighter regulations for data centers. And I'm happy to share out what they have publicly now and stay tuned in that space because Tristan from ACE has been doing some fantastic work rallying organizations across the country to make sure that we're not doing the same thing that we've done with all of our other energy infrastructure, which is put these huge, massively consuming pieces of infrastructure in the poorest and most marginalized neighborhoods. And so we're really hoping we can prevent that from happening in Massachusetts. And personally, I'm a bit of an absolutist, would love to see them just not come. But if we're behind the curve on that, having them pay their fair share of taxes and be heavily regulated and not exclusively in environmental justice communities is a good balance.
Uh, then Nina.
Yeah, I'll try and be quick about it. I didn't know the CTE type impacts of data centers. They just get more lovely the more you hear about them. I did a very quick, research into data centers when the legislator in Pennsylvania was asking for information. And another thing to consider is that they create very few permanent jobs.
Hmm.
Um, I will share in the chat also a toolkit that I came across recently on LinkedIn that an ally created. It is a community protection toolkit, and it walks through all of the different things that you need to consider. And you can think about asking your legislators if a data center is considered in your neck of the woods. In addition, the National Conference of Environmental Legislators has a data brief on data centers, and they have a lot of examples of what different states around the country are starting to do. So, for example, this is all draft legislation, but in Georgia, they do not allow in draft legislation the data centers to move greater energy costs of the data centers to be passed on to consumers. In New Jersey, they have draft legislation that would demand the data center run on renewable energy. So, not like a full out ban, but there's some hope there maybe. So I'll share the state stuff and the policy toolkit from LinkedIn because I haven't figured out how to download the PDF.
Awesome. Thank you. And I saw a question in the chat about what people can be doing on what municipalities can be doing to support some of these bills in terms of resolutions on city councils or things like that. And if any of the speakers want to chime in on that. I know some folks have already done so in the chat, but if any of you want to unmute and say what you said in the chat.
Sure. We'd be happy to get support from municipalities. We actually are working on developing broader municipal campaign. But we've already gotten support from a number of cities and towns throughout the state, as I think Dan noted this as well, whether it's through passage of a resolution by your local city or town, or having the highest ranking elected official in your town who you can get to do this, whether it's a mayor or a select person or the chair of a sustainability committee, whatever it might be, to call up not just the local legislators, both in the House and the Senate, but also to get in touch with the chairs of the TUE committee, which is hearing most of these bills. That would be Senator Barrett and Rep. Cusack. Barrett's from Lexington and Cusack is from Braintree.
Awesome. And then any other things on that? I think people probably can drop in the chat contact information for folks who want to help out with any local resolutions. And I want to call out one other question I saw from the chat was, can we do anything to limit or stop banks from funding new fossil fuel projects?
Yeah, so like I said, there's a lot of headwinds at the federal level and even in what's now with the sustainable investment space because of pressure coming from the federal government and from states. But Massachusetts itself still has some pretty big opportunities, especially with our pension fund, to redirect money away from these projects and towards clean energy and sustainability projects. And I'm happy to connect. There's a bill specifically that would help direct Mass Prim toward doing that. And I'd love to connect with anyone who's interested in working on that because I think there's a lot of promise in those efforts.
Awesome. And what I will say that if you do have any questions for any of our speakers, I'm sure that they'd be delighted to answer them directly if you reach out. So in closing for this evening, can I get another round of Zoom applause for our speakers this evening? On a reminder, you will get a wonderful follow-up email with many things that you should be doing as next steps from this. And can I get a round of Zoom applause for all of you for joining us this evening? And then stay tuned. We will continue to have more of such forums on different topics. So, kind of keep a lookout for your email, and we look forward to seeing you at upcoming events. One thing I will shout out, it's a different topic, but next Monday we'll be doing a forum on ballot questions for 2026. So if you want to join us again, I'm just going to drop that into the chat. And I will include that in a follow-up email to get to learn about some of those efforts and how to plug in. So with that, I will end the recording this evening, and thank you again so much for joining us.